being addicted to your phone does not mean you are weak. Most of the time, it is not even about a lack of willpower. The real issue is this: the device in your hand is extraordinarily well designed to trigger your brain's attention, curiosity, and expectation of reward. So you're not just carrying a phone. You're carrying a system in your pocket that fills empty moments, keeps your sense of curiosity alive, and calls you back to it again and again. That is why many people are not really using their phones so much as being constantly summoned back by them. To notice this, all you have to do is look at yourself honestly. You do not always pick up your phone for some big purpose. Most of the time, you pick it up for a very small reason: to check the time, to look at a short message, to see whether a notification has come in, or simply to keep your hands busy in a brief empty moment. But that tiny contact usually does not stay as short as you planned. You unlock the screen, open an app, see one piece of content, move to another, scroll down, tap another video. A few minutes later, the original reason in your mind has disappeared. You forget why you went in, yet leaving still feels hard. The interesting part is this: sometimes the time you spend on your phone is not even truly enjoyable. There are moments when you are not having fun. Moments when you are bored, moments when you keep seeing the same things, when content starts to blur together, when your mind actually gets tired, and yet you keep scrolling. Because what keeps you there is not always the clear pleasure you get from the content itself. Most of the time, what keeps you there is the possibility that the next scroll might show you something better. Not a guaranteed reward, but a possible one. The human brain is especially sensitive to this kind of possibility. The brain does not just record what happens, it is constantly trying to predict what might matter. It tries to figure out what deserves attention, which behavior is worth repeating, what might lead to a reward. If a behavior sometimes produces something interesting, sometimes something pleasant, sometimes something soothing, the brain does not treat it like an ordinary action. It flags it. It says, "Come back to this. There could be something here." Phones target exactly this system. This is where dopamine comes in. Dopamine is critical to understanding phone addiction, but dopamine is often explained incorrectly. People tend to think of it as if it were simply a happiness chemical. In reality, dopamine has much more to do with expectation, motivation, learning, and orientation. It tells the brain, "There may be something important here. Pay attention. Try again if needed." That is why dopamine is powerful not only when a reward arrives, but also when the possibility of a reward appears. For example, a notification appears on your phone. You have not seen the content yet. You do not know whether the message is from someone you were hoping to hear from. You do not know whether there is actually something interesting behind the screen. But your brain is already becoming active, because there is a possibility. Maybe it is good news, maybe social approval, maybe a video that will catch your attention, maybe something completely useless. The brain does not make that distinction before you see the content. First, it pulls you closer. And that makes the phone even more attractive. Every time you open your phone, you do not get a big reward. In fact, most of the time, you encounter ordinary, forgettable, empty content. But sometimes, something genuinely interesting appears. A funny video, a surprising fact, a comment you like, a message you were waiting for, a recommendation that feels exactly right for you. And the brain remembers these rare but powerful moments very well. A few strong rewards appearing among a lot of empty content can be enough to keep the whole system going. Because the human mind sometimes becomes more attached to striking things that appear rarely than to ordinary things that appear often. This is one of the biggest reasons phones are so addictive. They do not provide fixed rewards. They provide variable rewards. Sometimes there is nothing. Sometimes there is something mediocre. Sometimes there is something perfectly suited to you. Sometimes nothing grabs your attention for several minutes. Then suddenly something appears that hits exactly the right spot. This uncertainty makes the system incredibly powerful. Because when you do not know when the reward will come, your brain stays alert. If you saw the same level of stimulation every time, at the same intensity, you would lose interest much faster. That is why the phone experience resembles a slot machine in many ways. Every scroll functions like a new attempt. Every refresh creates the question, what will come up now? Every time you open an app, it creates a feeling of new possibility. You're not constantly winning something big, but because the possibility never fully disappears, you stay in the game. This mechanism is highly effective in making behavior repeat itself, because the human mind can be surprisingly defenseless against uncertain but possible rewards. Think about why pulling down to refresh an app feels oddly satisfying. Technically, you are doing something very simple, but psychologically, your brain perceives it as a new opening, a new possibility, a new outcome. It creates the feeling of, let's see what comes now. That is why the refresh gesture stops being just a technical command and turns into a small ritual of anticipation. Then there are endless feeds. Infinite scroll is one of the strongest design choices behind phone addiction because the human mind likes natural stopping points. An episode ends, a task is completed, a page of a book is finished, a meal comes to an end. These create a temporary sense of closure in the brain, but in phone feeds, these stopping points are intentionally removed. As you scroll, more content appears, then more, then more. There's no natural threshold at which the brain says, stopping here makes sense. That is what makes leaving so difficult. Short videos intensify this system even further. Because they are fast, require very little effort, and make switching extremely easy. If one video bores you, you immediately move to the next. The next one might be funnier, more shocking, more emotional, more curiosity-inducing. So your mind keeps receiving small bursts of stimulation. Looked at one by one, the content may seem harmless, but when it comes one after another, it keeps the attention system in a state of high-frequency stimulation. That is one reason why, when you put your phone down, you feel scattered and tired. Algorithms play a huge role here too, because what appears in front of you is not completely random. The system sees what you linger on, what you look at longer, where your scrolling slows down, which headline you click, which video you watch until the end, which one you leave quickly. Then, it uses all of that to show you more targeted content. Over time, the content inside your phone stops being just a general feed and becomes a personalized attention trap. Maybe you stay longer on comedy content, maybe on sports videos, maybe on arguments, maybe on relationship content, maybe on news that makes you angry, or maybe on the artificial feeling of closeness that comforts you when you feel lonely. The system starts learning what the reason is. Then it multiplies the kinds of things that will keep you there. That is why, after a while, many people are no longer looking at a phone. They are looking at a feed shaped around their own vulnerabilities. At a certain point, the phone stops being just a tool for relieving boredom. It turns into a habit you retreat to in moments of stress, open before starting difficult work, used to kill waiting time, and rely on to cover up uncomfortable emotions. You open it when you are bored. You open it when you are tense. You open it when you do not want to think. You open it when you feel lonely. You open it when you want to escape right before starting something important. In this way, the phone starts functioning not only as a source of reward, but also as something that reduces discomfort. And that is one of the layers that deepens addiction. For example, you sit down at the table to work. A difficult task is in front of you. Your mind resists. At exactly that moment, the phone offers a very easy escape route. You say, I'll just look for a second. But that second almost never remains a second. A message turns into a feed. The feed turns into a video. The video turns into another video. And you drift even farther away from the difficult task you were trying to escape in the first place. In that moment, you may feel relieved, but in the long run, your attention becomes fragmented. That is why phone addiction is not just a matter of time. It is a matter of attention architecture. Constantly interrupted attention makes deep focus difficult to build. Learning something, producing something, writing, solving, really thinking. These require time and continuity. But if your mind goes to the phone in every tiny moment of emptiness, your brain gets pulled away before it can deepen. This does not just create a loss of time, it also lowers the quality of your thinking. That is also why phone use sometimes feels tiring rather than enjoyable, because you are not actually resting, you are constantly changing direction. From one piece of content to another, from one stimulus to the next, from one app to another screen. Your brain is almost like a car that keeps changing gears non-stop, and that consumes energy. That is why, after looking at your phone for a long time, you sometimes feel not relaxed, but even more mentally foggy. Another effect is that it disrupts your boredom threshold. If your mind is constantly fed with fast, short, bright, reward-oriented content, the slower rhythm of real life may begin to feel insufficient. Waiting becomes harder. Silence feels uncomfortable. Staying with a single task for a long time feels difficult. Reading a book feels heavy. Even thinking can become harder. Because the brain has become accustomed to high-tempo stimulation. Real life, by contrast, is often quieter, flatter, deeper, but less shiny. This affects relationships, work, school, and even your ability to be alone. While sitting with a friend, your hand reaches for your phone. While working, you get interrupted every few minutes. While waiting in line, you immediately open the screen. In a quiet moment at home, instead of your mind wandering on its own, it looks for stimulation from outside. After a while, the phone stops being just a device. It becomes the default behavior that automatically fills the empty spaces of your day. But there is something very important here. This state does not have to be permanent, because if your brain learned this loop, it can also learn a different one. So the issue is not saying, "I have no willpower." The issue is recognizing that you have been exposed for a long time to a very powerful design. And the first step begins exactly there. Instead of blaming yourself, seeing the system. How do you take control back? First, by breaking the automaticity. That is why reducing notifications helps. That is why not keeping your phone within arm's reach on the table helps. That is why not keeping it beside you in bed helps. That is why removing certain apps from the home screen, simplifying the screen, reducing the number of entries, and placing small obstacles in the way helps. Because the more frictionless the system is, the more thoughtlessly the behavior happens. When you add a little friction, the brain has to decide again. The second step is making peace with emptiness again. The space your phone occupies most aggressively is the quiet in-between moments. But boredom is not always a bad thing. Waiting, gaps, and silence are necessary for the mind to recover. If you hand every empty moment over to the screen, you do not give your mind the chance to wander on its own. That is why being able to sit and do nothing sometimes, even if it feels difficult at first, opens up a very powerful space of freedom. In the end, the goal is not to hate the phone. A phone can be a useful tool. The problem begins when something that is supposed to be a tool turns into a center that controls your attention. The real goal is not to quit the phone completely, but to reach the point where I use the phone. The phone does not use me. Because the answer to the question of why we are addicted to phones is not a one-word answer. They touch the brain's reward system. Use variable rewards, remove natural stopping points, learn who you are, and feed you content tailored to you, and offer an easy escape in moments of discomfort. When all of these come together, a tiny screen can settle at the center of your attention. But the moment you notice this, a great deal starts to change, because now the question stops being, "Why am I like this?" and becomes, "How is this system working in me?" And when you ask the right question, the space for solutions opens up as well. That is exactly when taking your attention back starts to become possible.